Number 1. Barbara Bolick. Barbara was a 50-year-old woman who lived in Montana. She was a keen hiker, and she would often take people that visited her and her husband to the local Bear Creek Trail. She lived with her husband, who had previously suffered a heart attack, which left him unable to hike. On July the 18th, 2007, Barbara decided to go on a 2.6-mile trek in the Bitterroot Mountains. She went on this hike with a man named Jim Rimmaker. Jim was from California, and he was a friend who was dating Barbara's husband's cousin, and they were heading towards the usual spot that Barbara would usually take people, the Bear Creek Overlook. On the way, Jim stopped to admire the scenic view. At the time, Barbara was only around 6 meters behind Jim, but Jim claimed that after turning away from her for less than 1 minute, he looked back to see she had completely vanished into thin air. After the authorities were notified, a search was immediately carried out in the area, but it turned up no trace of Barbara whatsoever. So what happened to her? Well, it remains a total mystery. But how can somebody just disappear, and to do so without a single trace? The strange thing is that there is no other independent corroboration to say that Barbara was ever on the trail that day. But Jim said that he and Barbara spoke to 2 men on the trail. There are other witnesses that have actually confirmed the 2 young men were on the trail too. But despite the police offering a substantial award to identify these potential witnesses, they have never been found. There are a couple of possibilities. Someone could have abducted her, but can this really be what happened? After all, Jim was so close to her at the time. He surely would have heard the commotion. And if you're going to abduct someone, it's probably not best to do it when somebody else is there. So I guess we could almost certainly rule this one out. The next option is the possibility of an animal killing her, or her falling to her death. But I think these can be ruled out too, as no trace of her was ever found. And obviously in these scenarios, it would result in some trace of Barbara being discovered by now. Another theory is that she simply moved away and created a new life for herself. But why would she do this during the hike? It makes no sense. But what if the husband wanted to get rid of Barbara? He could have staged the perfect alibi for her disappearance by getting Jim to corroborate the story with him. One of the only ways to rule this out would be to find the 2 other men who were on the trail that day, as they would be able to confirm or deny this. It's a shame that they were never located. They were driving a Chevrolet Blazer with Missoula County license plates, and they were described as being well-tanned, young men in their early 20s, with a black collie dog with white markings. If they did indeed see Barbara that day, then I guess you could rule out some kind of corroboration between the husband and Jim. But when you first hear Jim's story, it sounds pretty unbelievable, and it does ring some alarm bells. However, the authorities have stated that Jim was very cooperative, and he didn't seem like he was lying to them. And there's no evidence to suggest that he did anything to Barbara. So at this present moment in time, they don't even consider Jim a suspect in her disappearance. And usually, a guilty person would at least come up with a better story than this. The victim simply vanishing into thin air in the middle of a hike. There are 3 things that creep me out the most in this case. Number 1, Barbara was an experienced hiker who was incredibly familiar with these parts, so this can be a case of her getting lost. Number 2, Barbara also carried a .357 Magnum, and she took it on all her hikes in case she needed to defend herself. And number 3, assuming that Jim is telling the truth and there was no foul play on his part, which is actually quite likely, the speed at which she disappeared is absolutely terrifying. All we can do is speculate as to what happened to her. But one thing is for sure. someone or something knows what happened to Barbara that day. But just imagine being Jim, being on a hike in the middle of the wilderness, and you turn around only to discover your hiking partner has vanished into thin air. It must be such a chilling feeling. Number 2. Michael Negrete. Michael was an 18-year-old freshman at UCLA. He was on a music scholarship. And on the 10th of December 1999, Michael had been spending the night drinking at a party with his friends. A little bit later on, Michael went into his dorm and played a computer game with one of his friends, who was in a dorm just across the room from him. They played for hours into the morning. His other roommate was asleep at the time. After they both finished, at around 4 a.m., Michael logged off his computer and went to congratulate his friend who he was playing with. The two men went back into their rooms, and that was the last confirmed sighting of Michael. Michael's roommate woke up at around 9 a.m., and he saw that Michael was gone, although all of his personal belongings were left behind, including his clothing, his wallet, and his musical instruments. And this is what creeps me out a little bit. His shoes were left behind too. Michael was reported missing, and a search was underway. The police searched every dorm, the dorm's garbage, and every construction site on campus, but they found nothing. Investigators tracked down dozens of UCLA students who lived in a dorm. Not one of them knew or saw anything. The family offered a $100,000 reward, which didn't result in anything, and hundreds of volunteers and friends searched for Michael everywhere. But unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. Investigators used search dogs to track Michael's scent, and the scent led to a bus stop, which was a couple of miles away from the campus. And that's where the trail ended. But could he have really gotten that far without any shoes on? And if so, why would he do that? But then 7 months later, investigators received a tip from a student at UCLA during a questioning about Michael's disappearance at the school. An unidentified 30 to 35-year-old white man had been seen around at 4:35 a.m. near his dorm. And this student did actually tip the police off previously about this, but they didn't take it too seriously. A sketch of the mysterious man was released in the year 2000. But 20 years later, the police have not been able to identify the man. But here's an interesting theory about the case. You may have heard of Damon Van Dam. His daughter was killed by a man named David Westfield. Well, anyway, Damon was a friend of Michael's father. It's said that Damon invited Michael to a video game party. And apparently, this is something that Michael would definitely leave his dorm for at 4 p.m. Damon was also in Los Angeles in 1999 when Michael disappeared. He said this during a radio show, and I quote, "I was in Los Angeles in 1999 when Michael disappeared. I'm a friend of Michael's father, and I worked with the man when it happened. And I do have to say that Damon bears a striking resemblance to the composite sketch of the man who was seen in the dorm at the time. Since the murder of his daughter Danielle, and since the picture has been all over the news, Damon Van Dam let his beard grow. Now, of course, all of this should be taken with a pinch of salt, and it's pure speculation. But nonetheless, it's interesting to theorize. Sadly, not a single trace of Michael has been discovered, and his bank account remains inactive. The investigators are treating his disappearance as a homicide, partly because there's nothing in Michael's background to suggest he might have disappeared willingly. There have been no recent updates on his disappearance, and the case has since gone cold. Do you guys have any theories about these cases? I find it strange that people can vanish into thin air never to be seen again. So let me know in the comments below if you have any other bits of information. And if you're still listening to this right now, I'll be in the middle of doing my farm work. I'm going to try and vlog my time there and make a little video of when I get back for anyone who's interested in seeing it. See you soon.